All right, we're live again. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Olga Bolotina. I'm a host for In the Know, the conversation series, conservation. Hey, it's a Freudian slip, right? Conversation series with environmental and sustainability leaders, people who are making real change in our communities, for our world, for everyone. And today I uber excited to have my friend, true leader, true environmentalist, Sophie Hahn, who is the council member in Berkeley, and she is also on the executive committee of the Sierra Club Northern Alameda County group of the SFB chapter. And Sophie Hahn was the chair of that group for a couple of years, right, Sophie? Couples of years, yeah. So very excited. It's been a while since Sophie and I connected. So it's 2020, 2021. So I think we both are excited to have this conversation and find out how we're both doing, I guess. So Sophie, thank you so much for making time. I know your schedule is extremely busy, especially now, probably in pandemic. So how are you doing, first of all?
Well, I'm doing surprisingly well. I know that there are many people in the community that have been facing terrible challenges, obviously health, and some have lost family members. And so I always really stay focused on what we can do to support them and express our support and condolences to those who've lost someone. But we also have a lot of people who are in economic distress because of the pandemic. So, for myself, I've been able to stay at home and knock on wood so far to stay safe. And a lot of my work I'm able to do virtually. So I've been not only able, but required in the good way to continue my work. And our work has actually ramped up in COVID. I know there's some people for whom this has created a lot of idle time, which is difficult in and of itself. And then there's others for whom the responsibilities have been increased. And for a city that is one of only 4 cities that has a health department, we are essentially doing the work, Berkeley does the work of a county and a city during the pandemic. So we've been busy.
I can only imagine. Yes, I forget actually Berkeley has its own health department. So yeah, I want to get to that because I think a lot of people, especially hearing from you, probably would be interested because there's a lot of coordination. I bet is going. But I want first to sort of start with Uncharted, and quite frankly, we never talked about it before. Also, how did you grow up? Where did you grow up? If you can say a little bit about that, that would be great.
Well, I grew up in the district that I represent in North Berkeley. I am a Berkeley Public Schools lifer with only one detour. I attended Craigmont, what at that time was called Columbus, now Rosa Parks, King Middle School, West Campus, which used to be 9th grade only, and then Berkeley High. And then I went to UC Berkeley, and I have a bachelor's degree in American history from UC Berkeley. I did then make what for some in Berkeley is an unforgivable detour, which is that I went to Stanford Law School. And so I have a JD from Stanford. There are more people in Berkeley and in the South Bay who have degrees from both. The divided loyalties, although I have to say, quite frankly, my blood runs blue and gold.
Wow. Hey, we talk about unity, so hey, only healthy competition, right?
Yeah, so I'm a local girl, and I did live also. My father was a professor at UC Berkeley, and that's why we lived in Berkeley. And we spent a couple of years living in France when I was growing up, in Paris, which is his place of birth and where he grew up. And I've also lived in New York City. So, but when I had my own first child, I came back to Berkeley, and I've been here since. So I've raised my two kids just a couple blocks from where I grew up myself.
Wow, it's as a person, I actually was reflecting on that just the other day, and it's like because I recently also a lot of people who actually grew, were born and raised here in Berkeley, Oakland, in the Bay Area. It's like, wow, this is such a different perspective because I'm a first generation immigrant. I came here as an adult, so it's like, how would that be to grow up here? I mean, I bet it was probably amazing, especially growing up. I was growing up in Russia when it was like we didn't have that many cars around. We ran around. We played on the streets, etc. Completely different childhood. How was your childhood? Was it also free?
We did have cars, but it was definitely a little more free range than the way the kids grow up now. We also were just came home from school and threw our stuff down in the front hall and ran back out the door. And we didn't really come back till we got so hungry that we decided to have dinner or it got dark. I mean, honestly, I feel incredibly privileged to have grown up in Berkeley. It was a very exciting time. I mean, I was born in 1961. And so the 60s and the 70s in Berkeley were a time of really enormous progress and protest and excitement and risk taking. And so I was able to be a part of that. And I was quite aware growing up that we were part of something special. I was in one of the first cohorts to go K through 12 under what at that time was, the most exciting thing going on in the United States, which was integrating our schools. And Berkeley was the first community in the country to voluntarily vote to fully integrate schools K through 12. And that was at a time when integration was being resisted openly. I think it's resisted in other ways now, but very openly with riots, intimidation, rock throwing, bullying, violence against people, all over the country. And Berkeley, through a very lengthy process that did involve, there was not everybody was on board right away, but the community did come around very definitively. And because of that, there was a ton of focus on Berkeley. A lot of federal dollars and state money flowed in for experimental programs. I was in all kinds of, they called them experimental schools, that not only were trying to really bring together people who had been separate before, but also were really interested in pedagogy and how you teach. So it was a very interesting time, and my father had students who were very involved in the anti-war protests and free speech. I used to go with him up to Folsom Prison to visit graduate students who were in jail for being conscientious objectors or refusing to answer the draft. And so he continued teaching those students. So, all around, there was a lot going on and an amazing time to grow up. But to bring in a little bit of an environmental piece, that was also the time when the Ecology Center was founded and when recycling first started in Berkeley. And recycling wasn't curbside. Curbside recycling was actually first introduced by the Ecology Center in Berkeley, and another Berkeley first. At that time, they had a center at the corner of Dwight and MLK, which used to be called Grove. I think at the time it still had a different name, but at Dwight and MLK, there was a sort of an empty lot or a courtyard type place, and they had these huge bins. And I remember as a little girl, it was very exciting to go down with my mom with all of our cans and bottles, and you threw the bottles into these huge bins. And I mean, it was free therapy, right? You just stood there throwing these bottles, the green in the green bin and the brown in the brown bin. And that's how we did our recycling. We took it down and had a lot of fun tossing it into these big bins.
Wow.
So,
Oh,
I do
that's
remember that.
incredible, actually, to make a chore into adventure. I think it's a true gift. And you know, I think that for parents now, I mean, I'm not a parent, so who am I to give any advices at all? That's not what I'm doing. But I hear a lot of parents now, you know, how can we turn chores or day-to-day activities into adventure for our children? And children, I think, want, most of all, they want to be engaged and involved and sit on your lap when you're doing something. You know, my mom was a teacher, so I remember, I can relate a little bit because you know, I remember going to her classes and being fascinated with all of those older children who were involved in some things that to me seemed also fascinating. Not quite as exciting as what you're talking about until late in my life, you know, when the 90s happened in Russia first. But going to jail, wow, this is, I mean, you packed so much into this story, you know, like where to start. So how did you choose the history and then the lawyer? Because I think what came up for me, that especially now we're in such a pivotal sort of moment in history, that if you learn history of United States or other empires, you can implement, you know, lessons now. So why did you choose history, and what do you see, sort of how do you reflect on it now, what's going on now in the country?
Well,
Big.
first of all, I will say that my father was a history professor, so a love for history. You know, I was very steeped in history, and at that time, the UC Berkeley had very wisely just expanded um, because they saw the big baby boom generation coming. And the university doubled or tripled in size in the early 60s in anticipation of that. And so they hired, I think the history department, they quadrupled the size of it over just a period of maybe 5 or 10 years. And what that did was it created this big cohort of young professors. Most of them were men at the time. And they brought them all in. They were all in their 20s. And so it actually created this very tight community. And so, you know, my parents socialized with history professors. The dinner table conversation was often about very interesting and arcane points of history. I remember one time when my parents had some of their professor friends over for dinner, and believe it or not, one of the guests was, you know, impassioned, talking about probably something really narrow, and he had a sourdough roll in his hand that he was trying to cut in half while he was talking. And as he got more and more excited about his topic, he actually cut his hand, and we had to take him to the hospital.
Wow.
So I grew up in a very history steeped household. But I will say also, I think probably had more to do with already being involved with civil rights and boycotts already as a grade school, middle, and in high school in particular. I was an activist in high school at Berkeley High and around the issues of the times. And we had excellent education at Berkeley High School. We had fantastic history professors, and we were aware that we were living history. So by the time I got to UC Berkeley as an undergraduate, you know, I took a couple of other types of classes, but I just immediately fell in love. But why American history? I think that also was very influenced by my years growing up, because I was fascinated by the history of segregation. And we learned a lot about slavery in grade school, which was very unusual for the time. And so I studied American history with an emphasis on race relations in the South. So I really studied the history of slavery, Jim Crow, and all the dynamics, the Civil War, and really, trying to understand what was going on in the world around me at the time. So it's linked.
And I should add, Sophie, that through our work together, I can attest that you are always focused on justice, inclusion, diversity, and it's not just an add-on, but it's always at the core of the conversation. I'm getting emotional. I'm sorry.
Well,
it happens quite a bit with me.
So to make a little bit of a bridge over to environmental work, I will say that I really was most engaged and passionate about human rights, civil rights. In college, I became very involved with women's rights, and I worked on language rights, opposing the English-only legislation that was put forward in the state. I opposed the attempts to get rid of affirmative action. I did pro bono work for the ACLU Reproductive Freedom Project. So really, I was very immersed. I did immigrant rights. I did an internship at the California Rural Legal Assistance, right? So all the human rights, civil rights issues are what really, really fueled me for a long time. But when I started getting more involved in environmental issues was quite frankly when I realized that the same paradigm and mentality, the same economic system, the same power structures that seek to exploit human beings and exploit division and create all these false and really damaging hierarchies enforced by violence, that same exploitative mentality was what was ruining the earth. The idea that everything in our environment, including human beings, exists for extraction purposes, to extract labor, to extract value without much regard for the consequences and the fallout from that, which is exactly the mentality that is resulting in all of the environmental damage that we're experiencing right now. So it was actually the link, realizing that the environmental movement and the civil rights and human rights, they're actually one movement. It's the movement against the exploitation for profit, the unfettered exploitation, anything you can get away with. And so that's really the foundation that I come into environmental work from, is we have to protect the earth from, and each other, from all the harm and damage that this kind of runaway capitalism has created.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I don't know if you, I mean, obviously 2020, I mean, yeah, it's one of those, if you know history, it happened before, it will happen again. And I think if we don't learn the history and if we don't remember the history, I think it's more likely to repeat itself. And I don't know if you know Hop Hopkins, who is also working for the National Sierra Club, and he wrote an article last year. And one of the things that, I mean, there are a lot of things that are very, very deep, contemplations, but one of the things that he wrote, there's no wasted people without wasted land. If we treat disposable people without disposable land. So if we treat the land as disposable and we treat people as disposable and vice versa. So I think it goes right to what you are talking about. Well, and also what a rich time to to grow up. And I want to hear a little bit more about, yeah, because I think that the childhood really are formative years, and how our parents nurture us, how, what we learn in school and through interactions really carry us forward. I'm excited to know what did you do in school? Because, when we're teenagers also, sometimes we're involved in our own sort of things. I mean, I remember in school, I was one of those rebels because we were still, it was like we had to wear a uniform, and we had to, it was just the, in the 90s, or late 80s and 90s, we were just all about breaking the rules, and not in a bad way, but in a sort of rebellious way. No, I'm not going to be wearing this uniform. I'm going to come how I want, etc. So in this little ways, so I'm curious, what did you do, when you were in school? What did you organize? How did you organize?
Well, we didn't have the clothing wars, but I will say that it might have been better if we had to wear uniforms, because looking back at the stuff we were wearing, it's kind of embarrassing.
I wish also somebody gave me fashion advice.
Exactly. I mean, these crocheted vests and anyway, whatever. It's, yeah. We used to call them India imports dresses. There were a lot of stores in Berkeley that sold nice, beautiful, summer prints from India, and they were long and flowy, and wraparound skirts with paisley and stuff. I mean, we dressed very 60s and 70s. But on a more serious note, so through the schools, I mean, I had teachers who were active in. I was in an experimental school grades 4 through 6. It was called Equal One. And 100% of the teachers were African American, and the whole school was run. And on purpose, whites were a minority, just a significant minority. So it's primarily African American focused program. And some of the teachers were active in the Black Panthers, and were themselves, really, really engaged in the activism in Berkeley and Oakland at that time, serving breakfast in the morning, and very, very activist teachers. Mm-hmm. So they would take us to marches. We participated in boycotts, great boycotts. Labor was a big issue then as well. They were organizing the farm workers, Cesar Chavez. Mm-hmm. All this stuff was going on when I was in school, and our teachers and our schools had us involved in those things. And by the way, that's one of the reasons I came back here to raise my own kids, because that's the kind of education I wanted them to have, and Berkeley still does that. But for my own self, in particular in high school, even though the school was integrated and friend groups, I think were somewhat. Extracurricular activities had just traditionally, I don't know how it came to be, but extracurricular activities tended to be segregated, not by rule, but by custom.
Separate or?
Excuse me?
Did you say extracurricular activities tended to be separate?
Well, basically, there were certain activities that tended to have all African American kids, and by the way, Berkeley had in the schools, I think it was more than 40% of kids were African American at the time. So the demographics were very different, so it was a much bigger influence culturally and socially in the schools and in the community. There were no rules that said that different clubs were white only or African American only, but they just, I guess, maybe looking back, it's because friends would recruit friends. Yeah. And so I joined with a couple of my African American girlfriends from middle school, and we decided that we were going to try to integrate extracurricular activities, and we did that largely by essentially agreeing to bring each other into each other's clubs, and then get other people to follow suit and kind of open the door to that. And
what were the clubs?
well, I was eventually, I think I was president of, I can't remember, of something that was called the Key Club, which Key Clubs, and they exist in high schools all over the country. And it's sort of like Junior Kiwanis or Lions Club or something.
So you have to educate me a little bit on.
Yeah. Anyway, they did, you know, we raised money for things, and we for like community efforts, and we volunteered for, you know, shelters and things like that. I mean, we did civic things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other was the cheerleaders. That was an activity that had traditionally been primarily, overwhelmingly African American girls at the time. There were no boys on the cheerleading squad. So I brought a whole bunch of friends into the Key Club, and then I tried out for cheerleading, and I became the only white cheerleader at Berkeley High.
Wow.
For my junior and senior years. So, but opening those doors actually did result in lots of other people stepping forward very quickly. So it wasn't that hard to do, but you had to decide to do it.
Well, you know, I'm one of my natural interest and inclination. I think if you communicate with people, and if you're just genuinely curious about yourself as a human being and how it, I think psychology is, you know, fascinating. And you know, there's so much research that you know, fortunately or unfortunately, we do gravitate to what is familiar. And if we're surrounded by people who look like us, that's where we naturally gravitate. So I think that bringing people together and having those interactions all the time and getting to know each other on a more intimate level, I mean, you know, friendship level, whatever level you want, I think is so important, because that's how fear or apprehension or whatever that is get dissolved. And I think that there's so much you know, prejudice on all different levels, you know, so I think we do need more of this collaboration, bringing people together and doing similar activities, because you know, ultimately we, at the core, we all care about quite the same things: being accepted, being loved, being, you know, taken care of, etc. So this is fascinating. I was like, I didn't know that about your childhood, how you grew up. This is quite amazing. So then
well, you know, think it probably seems charming now, you know, it's not, it wasn't, but at the time, as you know, as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, that, you know, high school's your whole world at that age. And, you know, it felt like an important piece of the whole movement of the time. You know, I will say that from my vantage point now, as much as I really experienced the hope and excitement and the sense of promise that was very focused, the whole national focus was that integrating schools was going to make a really big difference in equity and opportunity. And while I do think, obviously, there were some great strides made, the fact that our schools are more segregated than ever, and that here we are 50 years later, and in most really deeply meaningful ways, like health outcomes, opportunity, economic status, you know, the whole issue of policing and our unjust system of justice and the incarceration rates. It wasn't enough, and we've gone backwards. And it's for someone who has always really cared a lot. I think it's a pretty serious indictment of the failures of those movements to really prevail.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately, you know, because I also hear from my friends and some stories that are happening in Oakland schools or in public schools in California, which, you know, is one of the bluest states. Truly baffling, you know, how still I mean, and for me it's interesting because, you know, from when you come to this country, it actually took me, let me finish my thought, I'm jumping around a little bit, about how pervasive racism is and how blatant still is and how terrible it is, you know, towards teachers and towards kids. And how, you know, kids bring it to school. Where are they taking it from their parents? I mean, children are influenced by their parents and by the circles of their parents mostly. So
I think a lot of it is through the media as well.
the what? Media?
Through the media.
So the quest, how to, if we are talking about racism on that level, you know, in California, what is there to talk about in other, you know, in other states that are red or blue? So the question becomes, and I, you know, I know that it's a huge question, so we're not probably going to answer it today, but what to do, you know. And I think that you definitely in the position to influence a lot of things, not to put any pressure, but I think that by you putting those conversations and those questions constantly into the mix, into at the core of everything, is tremendously important. That's, you know, we can do what we can do, and what we can do is push forward, connect, bring people together. Well, maybe, I mean, I'm sort of answering my own questions here. What do you think we should be doing at this point when the, you know, a lot of bandits were ripped yet again last year, and we are sort of this, again, point of reconciliation? And you?
Well, actually, I think we need to do everything, because clearly the idea that you could just do one thing, and of course, you know, I mean, integration, it was just one idea. It was undermined in 100,000 different ways. And even in a community like here, where people's hearts were, I think, really in it, and they brought money to it, and resources, and excitement, and hope, and organizing, and all those things. And I don't want to say it didn't have positive impacts. It did. But when something is so systemic, you know, you can't just address it from one intervention. You have to intervene across the board. So every sector. And I co-authored legislation in Berkeley to do a comprehensive rethink for the community of what it means to provide health and safety. That is the most fundamental job of a city, is health and safety. But for example, you know, police in Berkeley are very well liked by a large segment of the population. They're very well trained. Our police have to have bachelor's degrees, and that's unusual. So they're well educated as compared to a lot of other police forces. I think we did have to, because there's been a shortage of people willing to apply for those jobs, I think we've gone down to an associate's degree. But, you know, we have traditionally had a very educated, very well-trained, progressive police force. Yet we have certain segments of our population that just happen to be people of color who have never felt safe and do not feel safe. That is not acceptable. The fact that, you know, maybe 80% or 60 or 70, a majority of people feel safe, it's not good enough. Everybody has to be safe and feel safe. So, you know, I think we really have to, our health statistics, we have a biannual health reports that we get for the city of Berkeley. And even in Berkeley, you know, the difference in life expectancy and the health outcomes for people of color versus the white population are shockingly large. And I actually think one of the difficulties with quote unquote blue states is that we have this idea that we don't have the, that,
Sophie, sorry.
well, that we, because we wish to be better and do better, we think we have done better. Mm-hmm. And that can create blind spots. I think that we need to re-examine everything and not assume that we've already done the work that needs to be done, because look where that got us.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm going to actually give a little plug in for the work that the Sierra Club is doing, because it is, you know, notoriously white, you know, organization, and it's not a secret. So, you know, I'm not disclosing anything that everybody doesn't know already. But I have to say, I'm very proud of the fact that Sierra Club is really taking very bold and actions on the national level, on the local level, to sort of ask this question: what do we not know we don't know? You know, and I think that in my mind, one of those solutions, I think we should ask our friends, our colleagues, people in the community who are not white, you know, what do they want us to do, and how can we be of help? And I think that's an integral part of progress in that direction. And I also, I'm very happy that we are our own Jacob Klein, who is the staff member at the chapter. He was doing a great job. We're starting a training for our leaders on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So very happy in a week and a half. I hope, Sophie, you can join us. Obviously, I think it's a conversation that has to be ongoing, and not just, you know, we're already thinking about not how to just have, you know, 5-6 sessions, but also how to continue and how to really set, you know, goals that are truly changing the face, that not only the look, but also perspective and, you know, work of the club. So at least that's my sort of vision for, you know, how in a year, 2 years, 3 years we can look and feel different, and also bring different issues to the table from different perspectives also. So anyway, little deviation. So, but I want to talk a little bit about the sustainability, environmental protection, and even though it's all absolutely integrally connected, you know, you grew up in Berkeley. I mean, hey, it's, by the way, pouring rain all of a sudden started, which I'm rejoicing.
I noticed that too, and then it got dark in this room, and I realized I didn't have enough lighting. But
you look great. You look great. I was just telling you, you know, I was telling Sophie off the record that she has a great COVID look for sure. I love it. Lavallon here. But you grew up in Berkeley, you know, how did you start caring about environmental issues? I know you're also a gardener, so, you know, are there any things that brought you into the environmental movement?
Well, I had certainly been involved in sort of, you know, I've been a member of the Sierra Club since I was in college. So, you know, environmental issues were always important to me. I probably first started when I worked in my late 20s, early 30s for the International Planned Parenthood Federation, mm-hmm. which is it's actually the third largest NGO in the world. A lot of people don't realize that, after the UN and the Red Cross. Wow. The IPPF, WHR, International Planned Parenthood Federation.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a huge, you know, and it's a little bit like the UN or the Red Cross. There's chapters in every country, and they have these big conferences and conventions, and there's a lot of, you know, there's a whole parliamentary thing, there's politics. not the kind of politics you think of, but international politics. And
Politics is everywhere, right?
yes, politics,
Nothing
of
politics, I say, is nothing but relationships, that's
yes, yeah. So, when I was working there, the Western Hemisphere region was North and South America and the Caribbean. I don't know why they pulled that out separately, and the headquarters were in New York City, even though most of the staff was not United States, from the United States. So the head of the organization was a Chilean gynecologist, and there were people from all over. So, through that work, I really, I did policy work and represented the organization at the UN. That was a lot of fun. And traveled a lot, but the whole quote unquote population question was kind of a big tension at that time, because there were some movements, not in Planned Parenthood, but in the in the global. There were this idea that the population was the problem, and then you had other people who said no, consumption is the problem. One American is trashes the earth, the same as 1,000 people in Guatemala or something, right? That was a really, really big conversation at the time. And so that's when I first began to focus on, yeah, that makes sense. It's not, each of us has an environmental impact. All of the activities of developed countries, quote unquote, developed, put that in quotes, industrialized countries, right? Let's not call them developed, we'll call them industrialized societies, versus other ways of living on the land and living on the earth, are more and less respectful of the earth and have more and less impact. And so that, I would say, was the beginning of that bridge that I made from, because I got into family planning and reproductive freedom and justice from my civil rights angle. But I really saw that it was, this whole, I think, misplaced conversation about population really was a conversation about environmental impacts.
Unfortunately, I think it's still a big conversation in some circles, and Sierra Club actually had a battle, about 10 years ago, which I'm glad that in my opinion, the side that let's concentrate on other ways to address climate change and to address environmental issues. It's absolutely true. I mean, look at how much waste we produce. Just one person. I mean, I think that I live, trying to live fairly conservatively in terms of consumption, but even I throw away a lot of, my personal goal this year. I want to research all those, zero waste people and see how they live. And can I really live this way within this system that we created?
It's hard because our whole society is set up to consume and throw away. And I mean, I'll never forget after 9/11, when then President Bush, they asked him, what should we do? And he said, go shopping. And I just, I've never forgotten that, because I thought, is it really life, liberty, and the pursuit of cheap goods? Is that really what we have become as a nation? And this kind of idea that growth is always good, and every form of growth, and in particular growth that is centered on wasteful consumption. And even if you, we all know at this point, even if you try to get something repaired, it's very hard. You know, you get a toaster oven and it breaks. There's no place to get it fixed. So what are you going to do?
Well, you know what I heard, which was, I think there has to be a law against it. I'm sorry, but I feel very strongly about it. You know, phones, I heard, I don't know if it's urban legend or if it's actually true that it's already built in the phone that if the new model comes out, the old one starts to malfunction. So the updates that you download constantly sort of do that, which to me, it's absolutely crazy. There's no reason. I mean, this phone can do more
right.
than you ever need, you know?
Well, it's called planned obsolescence. And it's the idea that things are actually designed to not last for long. Even if the components or whatever might last for a long time. I mean, fashion is really planned obsolescence, right? Why do they come out with different colors every year? Why do pant legs go from narrow to medium to wide and then to medium and narrow again? Why do shoulders have pads and then they don't? It's so that you will buy something new every year, or you feel like you're not with it, or you're frumpy. And there's, you know, the whole industry is organized around convincing people that they need new things every year when they have perfectly good ones in their closet. So, you know, one of my heroes is Annie Leonard, who lives in Berkeley and lives in my district. And she founded something called The Story of Stuff, and now she's the executive director of Greenpeace USA. But you know, her Story of Stuff series, if anyone who hasn't watched them, they are just as relevant today as they were. I think they're probably 10 or 15 years old now. Really, really lay this out in full detail and in a way that is easy to digest, although you don't feel very good after you've watched one of the Story of Stuff videos. So, yeah, it is a lot about how we've organized our economy and even our perception of what happiness is and what fulfillment is made of. And it's hard to go against that grain. I mean, our society is a machine.
Yeah. Well,
pushing us through that.
It has to be a deliberate effort, and honestly, it has to start in the family and at the school level, because I mean, we teach our children that's how we were taught. You know, we teach them now, especially technology and planning and, you know, design. We don't teach them anything about our own bodies, how we operate, you know, how biological systems are structured, why we should, you know, not consume more than we can and extract. I think we just really need to concentrate on different education, honestly, alternative.
So I'm going to push back a little gently on that. That's the same mistake that was made when people thought that integration would solve the racism, you know, all the issues around racism in this country. The idea was, oh, well, if we put kids through these integrated schools, they'll rise up and they'll bring it forward. But we don't want to change the way we are.
Oh, no. I'm totally not. I'm not saying, let's put that, no. Yeah.
But I just, I think there is an easy tendency. Now, certainly schools and children are one piece of this. But I think the real challenge is for everybody else to make the effort at the same time. Why don't we just imagine that this is a time where everybody from the age of 100 down to one day is all engaged simultaneously in making these changes. I think that's going to be more powerful. But the idea that older people have their habits and it's harder for them to change and we give up on them, which I think is convenient. I think that may have been one of the big missing pieces for the work that was done in the 60s and 70s around the issues that were most prominent at that time. I don't want us to make that mistake. I think we all have to make these changes.
Sophie, I totally agree. I think it wasn't, what I was saying, and it's not in either or for sure. I think that it's just, what I heard also expression. I need to really make a point to remember who's saying those things, because some of them are, I think, profound. That we tend to want to save what we love, and we love what we know. So I think that, why I'm constantly questioning why am I so passionate about nature? Why smell the roses, touch the plants, observe, why I want to save it? Because I love it, because I grew up with that, because I grew up touching, smelling, looking. So I think it's just important that we yes, do that difficult work of reframing our own minds and really asking the questions, deeper questions, like how can we do, and what can we do, and who we need to be at the core to implement those changes that we want to see in the world, and how we can model and how we can live, walk the talk. And also, I think that I just see that again, going back to the childhood is such a formative time in all of our lives, that I think that if children are brought up knowing those natural processes and learning about them and getting in love with them, I think that we could, raise a whole generation. But again, it's
wholeheartedly. A lot of it is about habits and about your frame, and a lot of those are established when you're young. But I just want to make sure that we think adults can break habits too.
Yeah.
And we all need to. That's our work.
That's true. You know what I wanted to say about the fashion? I was like, we should have a section, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, because the fashion is constantly rotating. So I wish I saved some of my mother's shoes, I have to say.
Yeah, back to style, right?
They are.
Yeah. Well, and so, some of the initiatives that I've done on the city council, one I would say on environmental issues, that the two biggest things I've been involved with are obviously the single-use disposable and litter reduction ordinance, which is the most sweeping anti-plastics legislation ever. It's been copied now. It has been copied, and some have even tried to go beyond. But a year and a half ago, it was the most far-reaching legislation that that had ever been done by a local jurisdiction anywhere in the world. And then the ban on natural gas in new construction. And both of those are about breaking habits. The restaurants and consumers are used to the quote unquote convenience of these cheap plastic containers and utensils and plates and this and that. And we're creating a mountain of plastic waste that ends up soiling our environment locally, and in the places where we export that waste to, in particular, are made very toxic by it. It really comes down to getting a bunch of food vendors to buy other stuff and find other ways to serve food. It's changing those habits. And it's hard to change a habit, but once you've changed it, you have a new habit. And I'm really delighted to see that even during the pandemic, we have a lot of restaurants that have moved to either, lots that have substituted reusable items for throwaway items, and then a lot of compliance, although not full, with the compostable to-go-ware. And so they've been able to do it even under these very challenging economic times. And the people think gas in California, gas dryers, gas stoves, etc. Well, there are states in the United States where most homes don't have gas. And certainly in Europe, in Western Europe, which I'm more familiar with, I don't know about Russia, but you know, people don't have gas. They don't have gas stoves. They don't have gas washing machines, and they survive. And so that's a California habit, and we got pushback on that too. You know, how am I going to cook food? Well, a lot of people eat without having gas stoves. I will say that I have an old gas stove, and it's on its last leg, and as soon as it's ready to go to it's not a good idea to switch things out that are still usable, right? But it's probably near the end of its useful life, and I will replace it with an induction stove, and they're fabulous. They're absolutely fantastic. The technology now for electric stoves it's not your grandma's electric stove.
No, that's a great point, and you read my mind. I was about to ask because I know that you've been a champion on the city council, and before that, I mean, the way we met, I mean, you came to the Sierra Club also with the legislation that was groundbreaking back then.
That's
also
true. Yes, on the urban agriculture.
Exactly. So we didn't even touch on that part of your life, which I don't know how many people know that you're a gardener, that you have a beautiful garden in your backyard. So
yes, I run a CSA with 2 Berkeley backyards are under cultivation, and we grow hyper local organic produce for, I think we have over 20 CSA members right now. We don't produce baskets in the winter months, but throughout the growing season, about 9 months of the year, we grow hyper local produce that has 0 vehicle miles. And during those months, that's the only produce that we eat in my family, other than a special occasion or something when we're having people over and we need a bigger quantity. So we eat local. That's a habit everyone can change.
Mm-hmm.
All these small acts.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, all these small individual acts, it's like voting.
Mm-hmm.
It all adds up. So what you do in your personal life, reducing your consumption of meat, whatever habits you can change, it's like voting. We all have to change the way we consume, and we have to change our impact on the planet.
Yeah. Last question, Sophie, and unfortunately the hour went by just really fast. I think it's a lot of, why do you do what you do? Because you sort of answered the question of what is the important points, but why do you do what you do? Something that you can share with us that is really driving you and can inspire others too.
Why? Honestly, at its base, I love humanity. I love the earth. I believe very, very deeply in the worthiness of every human being. I really revel in the commonalities of the human experience. I love people's stories and struggles and their accomplishments. I love our planet, the universe. I love nature and beauty. And I love to solve problems. I love to have a positive impact. I love to push the envelope. I like to make things better. I'm a fixer. I'm really a fixer at heart. And so love and fixing.
And I can attest to that. When we were together, so always was trying to find a way that is most efficient, inclusive, and workable. So truly a pleasure. Sophie, I love you. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we're not going to wait for months and months and months to connect again. So good luck with everything. Yes, and I hope you're going to do more groundbreaking things in this year. And oh my God, as I say to everybody, happy new president year.
Yes. We are so grateful. Thank you so much.
All right, big hug. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next Friday. Thank you, and keep moving, keep serving, keep taking care of yourself, of people around you, and think about one habit that you can change that will improve your life of people around you and the planet. So thank you.
1 month.
I love it. All right. Until later, until next Friday. Bye.